Sounds good.
And I'll wait till the clock ticks up to 1:30. All right, welcome back, everybody. This is the 2021 Virtual Residency Introductory, Intermediate, and Advanced Workshop. It's Monday, June 7th. This is the early afternoon session, and I'm delighted to introduce Bruce Mason. He is a professor of physics here at the University of Oklahoma, and he's going to be talking about academic life, tenure, promotion, and more. So take it away, Bruce.
Thank you, Henry. A little bit more of an introduction to me. My PhD was in theoretical physics and did a lot of computational stuff, and then started working with faculty both on education and research. So I was one of those people who, as a postdoc, was running a small computing network. I have also been for many years a what's called the faculty advisor to the OU CIO. Now, what exactly that means, I guess, is I'm supposed to channel the reactions of faculty to things that IT wants to do, which of course is impossible because all faculty are different and are very unique, but I do my best. And so this presentation started a few years ago when I gave it to the IT directors here at OU, trying to explain faculty to them. Again, a nearly impossible task, but it's why I'm here. And it's what I'm going to need lots of questions to make sure we cover the things that the questions you have about who faculty are and why they do the funny things that they do. So that's me. I always want to know my audience. My normal audience is freshman and sophomore engineer and geoscience majors. So this audience is quite different. So what I want you to do is in the chat, I want you to do a quick introduction. Just give us your the title that you would give for your job, how you would explain your job, and where you live, what institution you're working on. So just to get me centered, let's go ahead and let me know who you are. Ooh, okay. And this is important because there's going to be a test at the end, and the correct answers will depend a little bit on who you are. Okay. Okay, I've seen a couple of people that have the title AVP, so I'm going to have to be careful what I say. Be careful about comments about upper administration. I'll make sure I do that. Okay. Good, good. Now, those of you who are or have been faculty, I need you to chime in. So my view is going to be somewhat my view. I tried to get as much possible here, but your experiences and your reactions are going to be really important. So questions are great. Questions will help us out, and also anecdotes. If you have things that you want to explain, or your experience, all of these would be very useful. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to start with this will be a test at the end, but I wanted to make sure you're prepared for the test. So there's going to be a vocabulary test at the end, and it's on this vocabulary. And so I want you to read through these. These are academic titles. I want you to ask questions about what these mean, who these are. If any of these confuse you, if you haven't heard of these before, which of these don't you understand? Okay, so go ahead. Or you can even talk about it too. Okay, regent. Okay, regent and trustee. Yeah, those are the upper level people that most of you hopefully don't have to deal with. Yeah, we'll talk about renewable term versus assistant. And this all has to do with this idea of tenure and tenure track. Endowed, yeah, there's very definite things with endowed. Too many A names. Well, you really were stuck with this. So when you're talking to people at your institutions, you're going to be dealing with these. Emeritus professor. That's a professor who has, I guess you could say, semi-retired. They have retired, but they're quite often people that are still doing research. And so there's still people that are around the campus. Okay, research track versus tenure track. Yep. Visiting professor. I don't even have visiting professor. That's a good one to add. A visiting professor sort of fits into some of these research professor things. Okay, excellent question. Oh man, this is good. It's not so much of what they mean, but how they are related hierarchically. Here's my shot at that. So here we go. Again, who you're talking to, and the names that you use at different institutions are going to be slightly different. But here's sort of the hierarchical thing that we have to work with. Trustees, regents, sometimes they're called visitors. This is the board of directors. So this is the board that runs the, hang on a second. This is the board that runs the university. And most of you probably don't have to deal with them. Some of you might. Those of you that have a VP or an assistant VP name, you might have to deal with them. So I'm going to leave them off to the side. The hierarchical structure for the operation of the university itself, at the top, the name is different. Sometimes they're called presidents, sometimes they're called chancellors, sometimes presidents are over multiple. Hang on a second. Sorry. These are either over multiple campuses or maybe a single campus. And then the provost is the main academic vice president. So this is the person that is usually the senior vice president in charge of academics. There's always multiple vice presidents. So vice president for research, vice president for administration, chief financial officers, things that we have here, a CIO. These are all the administrative people. And again, a lot of you probably don't have to deal with this level. Some of you do. So if you're asking for money, sometimes these are the people that you have to go to. And then the deans are the people that run individual sections of the university. So here at OU, we have the College of Engineering, College of Arts and Sciences, the College of Geosciences, although it's called different things now. And these run the individual pieces of the university. So this is the administrative box. And then what I have next that's in both the administrative box and the tenure track box. That's the one on the left is the department chair. So they run the individual departments. And then within each of these, in the departments, there's different levels of tenured professors. These are the people that have full-time appointments, not full-time appointments. Hang on a second. This is, I need to take this. Oh, no, I don't have to take this. I need to turn this off. I usually don't get any calls. Okay. These are the people that have essentially lifetime appointments. And there's different levels from the endowed chairs, which are, most high-powered professors, full professors, associate professors, and assistant professors. So that's the one on the left. On the right is the untenured people involved with the university. And they have very different titles. So research professor, research scientist. Renewable term is someone that has a multiple year contract, but it's not a tenured, this lasts for life sort of contract. Postdoc researchers, graduate researchers, instructors. Instructors just teach classes. An adjunct instructor is just teaches classes for one semester at a time. So they tend to have very short-term appointments. So there's the structure. How does that do? Questions about this, or does anybody disagree with this? We'll get to associate, assistant, full, endowed. So that's the main goal of what we're going to be doing here, is what these are. Yeah, this depends, the school, college, department distinction, this depends a little bit on your university. Sometimes, most things are called departments. So like I'm in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. Things that have a higher profile time sometimes are called schools. It's really a department, sometimes usually bigger. A college is multiple departments. So a college will have anywhere from 3 or 4 to, in arts and sciences for a university, it might be 20 or 30 different departments just within the college. The dean runs the college, the chairs or the directors run the schools or departments. Good questions. What else? So the big distinction here in these 2 bottom boxes is, on the left are things that are tenured, on the right are positions that are not tenured. And one of the big things I want to talk about is what tenure is, how you get there, and what it means. So that's where we're going. So you may have heard of the tenure track. Well, that's where we're going. We want to talk about what this means, how you get there, and where it takes you, or maybe doesn't take you. Oh, president versus provost. President is over an entire university, or maybe multiple campuses of a university. Provost is the chief academic officer. So a provost is more like the chief operating officer, where the president is more of the chief executive officer. So the provost, yes, deals with money. They also deal more with hiring and firing, so dealing with the faculty. Presidents spend a lot of time raising money, frankly. And that's, again, these terms may be used slightly differently in different campuses, but this is the general usage of these names. So let's talk about faculty And chancellor and president. Okay, chancellor and president. Different names for the same thing usually. So different campuses use chancellor or president to describe their head honcho in charge. So that's just a term, and it depends on where you are. So you may have that term used in your campus, or it may be called chancellor, it may be called president. Quite often, chancellor is in charge of a system, but I've known systems where that's reversed, where the president was in charge of the system and the chancellor is in charge of the campus. So that's why, it depends on where you are. So, these names you got to get, fit into your names. Good. Again, this is going to be a lot of the U.S., but the names, the sort of positions are similar. A professor in Europe has more power than a professor in the US. But anyway, let's talk about faculty. And to give you an idea of faculty and the way faculty think, I want you to read this statement. This is a statement from the OU Faculty Handbook. It's about tenure. So we're going to be talking about tenure, which is this appointment for academics to keep to essentially keep working as long as they want to on what they're doing. I want you to read that. I want you to think about it for a little bit and think about your reaction to this statement. Because this is in the faculty handbook that describes what I do as a faculty member. So let's be honest here. What's your reaction to this statement? Yeah, let's be honest. Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh. Does it ever actually happen in practice? Actually, in a lot of ways, it does. And therefore, you got to think about the people who, the faculty were involved in writing this. So this is what the faculty think their job is. So it's interesting how many faculty really feel this is what we're doing. Yeah, I mean, this means that the people who get these positions need to show that they can, really do this sort of work. You might also notice the words I put in red. As a physicist, I have some trouble with the idea that I'm pursuing truth, but that's a philosophy question, so we won't go there. But this does allow, I mean, Henry talked about this a little bit, in the morning session. Faculty researchers are really very independent. Someone said no accountability. It's not quite to that point, but there's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of freedom. And true, we'll talk about later how realistic this really is. But this is aspirational, and it really talks about what we're doing here. So let's think about how you get here. Oh, I thought chemistry was all about truth. Oh, silly me. No, anyway. So here's the timeline. Well, that's just it. TAs, grad researchers, renewable term faculty, all these people do not have tenure. So there is a distinction between the two that is very much baked into the system. And there are issues there. Okay, so here's the academic timeline I'm going to talk about. I'm actually going to add the endowed professor up there at the top, but we'll get there in a second. So let's say year 0 is when I enter graduate school. Okay. How long does it take me to finish a PhD? What do you think? Think about those of you who have done a PhD or those of you who know PhDs. Think about the grad students you've worked with and how long it takes them to finish. Okay, good. Good. Okay. Okay. Good. It very much depends on what you do. Okay. So here we go. It's sort of the median is 6 years. This is a little bit hard to see, but this up here is education. We won't talk about that. But the STEM disciplines are the ones down here that are between 6 and 8 years for the median. And notice it hasn't changed much. There's been people that talked about trying to change it, but 6 is below the median for almost all STEM majors. Humanities is longer. So those of you who are supporting humanities research or social science research, in fact, their timeline is longer. So 6 years, let's just say 6 years. I've finished my bachelor's, I started graduate school, I finished my PhD in 6 years. After I graduate from graduate school, I usually go on and do research. And this is what's called the postdoc positions. How long do you think most people spend as a postdoc? 2 to 3? 2 to 3? Again, this varies a lot with different disciplines. Absolutely. 2 to 3? Okay. Yeah. There is no max for a postdoc because a postdoc is a position where you've been hired on by a research group. And if they have money, they may keep you around as long as they've got money. Most postdocs are 2 to 3 years, but quite often people do a couple of postdocs. And therefore, yeah, I mean, Dina is right. Quite often it takes a couple of postdocs before you may be able to find a professorship, a tenure track professorship. So let's say I do 2 postdocs. So that's another 4 years. So it's now 10 years after I graduated from my bachelor's that I'm now entering an academic tenure track position, the assistant professor position. So the assistant professor position for a tenure track line, a tenure track position, is the first level. That's where you get hired in at. And so that's where you start. You've got this, you've done research. You're good enough that someone wants to hire you as potentially someone who's going to get this tenured position. And remember, we said tenured position is pretty big deal. This graph shows, how many people do postdocs. And again, up here at the top are a lot of the physical and life sciences. So 60 to 70% of the people who get PhDs go on to some sort of postdoctoral position. So a lot of people do this. And if you're good enough, you can apply and you get an assistant professor's position. And then you got your next step. And this is what Henry referred to as that 7-year period. So that 7-year period is where you go from an assistant professor where it's kind of a trial basis to after 7 years, you have to say, okay, I'm going for tenure. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that people spend this time before they get an assistant professorship. But the standard procedure is a couple of postdocs, you get an assistant professor. So year 17, so from when I graduated college to year 17 is when I can get this position tenured. So I can get this big deal. I am now a tenured professor. It's a lot of time. If you think about it. You spend a lot of time going this direction. Right. If you want to go again, you can go again. Yeah, a lot of institutions are changing. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on after we've talked about the the institutions that are sort of giving different types of positions. So a clinical position or sometimes a more solid teaching position. But I have a good friend who is at an institution that I won't mention, who was on one of these clinical positions that is not tenured, but was renewable term. Renewable term means every 5 years you go up, 5 to 7 years you go up and they renew the term. She was going to go up to a full professor on this clinical position, and instead they fired her. So there you go. Assistant professor is entry level. Associate professor is what you get in most cases once you get tenure. Exactly. So let's talk about what it means. Oh yeah, and full professor sometime later, you may or may not get it. So here we go. I'm a new assistant professor. What do I have to do? Well, what I have to do is I have to set up a program, a research program, an academic program, and I have roughly 6 years to do this. Yeah, what I was talking about in terms of professorships is there are renewable term or clinical professors that are not tenured, but they are ranked. So you can have associate, assistant associate, and full professors that are clinical, non-tenured, renewable term. That's becoming more and more popular, and we can talk a little bit about why that is. Well, let's talk about traditional tenure first, and then we'll talk about why that is changing a lot more. So 6 years of academic productivity. And then you have to write your life story. You've got to write up all that you've done, why you deserve this big thing, tenure, why you're such a good person and an excellent researcher, so that people will say, yes, you deserve tenure. At the same time, other people outside the university are reviewing you. So these may be people that you know, these may be people that you don't know, but are in your field and will review your work. And so while you're writing your life story, other people are also judging your life story. And you might think about the level of paranoia that might cause someone who's going through this process. Once you have your life story written up and you get this reviews, it goes to your department who votes on you. Then that goes to the dean in college, and then usually the campus tenure committee. Again, they look at all this and say, yep, that's someone who may need tenure or may deserve tenure. And then finally, it goes to the provost and then the presidents and then the regents. And if you make it through all that, you're now tenured. So what I want to do is think about this 6 years of academic productivity. Oops, so here we go. Academic productivity, usually there's some sort of expectations that are written up, and they talk about, publications, money, collaborations, reputation, teaching, service, so forth. So these are the things that you have to talk about when you're writing up your life story. This is what shows your academic productivity. Now, of course, that's not really what this looks like. Here's what it really looks like. And again, this depends on different universities, but really, this is what it looks like. Publications, money, things that show that both you are productive in terms of output and productive in terms of input. So raising money during this time is important. Depending on the university, it may not be how much money you bring in, but how many grants you've written. Other universities, it's flat out, are you bringing in enough money? Really depends on the money. And then, if you think about, you're getting reviewed by external people, the external reviews, it's real important that you have collaborations, you set up a reputation, you do talks, you go to other universities and work with people. All these things are part of building up your life story to support your tenure packet. One thing in here that for people who are engineering, quite often consulting work goes into here as well. So maybe working with companies is important here. Teaching and service is written as part of the academic productivity. For a lot of research institutions, if you're adequate teacher, that will do. And if you're in a good department at a good university during this whole tenure process, hopefully the amount of service you have to do is the smallest amount possible. Because let's face it, that really doesn't have a whole bunch of help when you think about your job as a tenured professor. So that's the tenure decision. Stop a second. Thoughts, questions. Again, people are pointing out that different institutions are doing different models. But this is the model for this position that really is independent. That it's really something that is, a lifetime appointment. A friend of mine and I always laugh that this is like, winning the lottery. You're guaranteed X amount for life, or, until, you do something really bad. So there we go. Questions about this. So I'll stop talking for a while. Questions or thoughts, your experiences too. There isn't, although good departments will tell you sort of what the expectation is. And it's very much department dependent. And it's also dependent on the discipline you're in. So for example, in my department, we're both physics and astronomy. And the requirement for publications in astronomy is really high. They expect lots of publications. For other groups in our department, for example, for experimental atomic physics, the publications is a lot less because it takes you 3 or 4 years to set up a good lab. If tenure is denied, you got to find another job. So if you're denied tenure, pretty much you're going somewhere else. And you basically have a year to find somewhere else. That's an interesting question. Too many PhDs are being produced. There's certainly a lot more PhDs than we need tenure track positions. And I'll show you some numbers there in just a second. There's certainly a lot more PhDs created than we have tenure track positions. But there's a lot of other things that PhDs should be doing. And so, there's debate whether or not there's too many PhDs. Some people think so, some people don't. But there's a lot of places that PhDs go that are not tenure track position or even academic positions. Yeah, like I said, this emphasis depends on the institution. And this tends to be sort of an R1 slant. I don't know what your institution is, but this is for a Research 1 institution, this is kind of the slant. Right. Other universities and other institutions will have different things. So there's some that, student mentoring is even more important. And I put student mentoring different from teaching because student mentoring is about bringing students into the research process and into the scientific process. And although that's teaching, it's a very different sort of teaching than what you do in getting up in a classroom. Yeah, and there's a lot of not just national labs, but there's some companies that want that same sort of experience, the PhD. Let's really focus on a research problem type of experience. Yeah, someone privately, said some comment about getting grants requires publications, and publications require getting grants. What you have there is universities will put some money on you. They're going to put a bet on you when you come in as an assistant professor. So if you ever heard the term startup, universities will pay startup for professors to get them going. And the amount of startup depends on the research program, who they are. Experimental physicists, it takes upwards to $1 million. So they're negotiated, but it can take a lot of money to set up a cutting edge lab. The idea is that money is going to get paid back when you write all these grants. So go back and think about that in terms of what Henry was saying this morning. The university has put money on you. in expectation that you're going to bring money back in. Lobbying and tenure. There's not much, as in the tenure votes within departments are private. And so the departments will discuss your case. And in that sense, you can get lobbying, as in people might advocate you or describe it. But ultimately, it's a secret ballot. And there's real questions about that too, in terms of equity issues. But yeah, I mean, there's people will support your tenure, but ultimately, the faculty in your department, their vote, which is private, is a large part of whether or not you get tenure. Good. Other questions or other experiences? Someone made the excellent comment about, I would argue PhDs need to be told from day one that there are other options than faculty jobs. Absolutely, couldn't agree with you more. In fact, that's not just PhDs, that's our undergraduates as well. And within physics, I'll speak from the physics point of view. I don't know what your experiences are, but from the physics point of view, there's a lot of things that our professional societies have been doing to try to bring this out. The American Physical Society, the American Association of Physics Teachers, the American Astronomical Society, they're spending a lot of time trying to help people understand all the things that they can do, and also help departments support the people that are not necessarily going to be, academic physicists or academic scientists. Another example, when I first got here, I had a couple of graduate students that I went rock climbing with all the time. One of them was my graduate student, one of them was a high energy student, talking about other jobs. None of them went into academia. One of them went into a research position at Sandia Labs, and is doing on device physics. The other one went to Wall Street, and he's done the computational derivatives Wall Street stuff. At that time, there wasn't as much emphasis about how do you prepare these people for this sort of jobs. Now there's a lot more of it. So both of them are basically doing data science, managing lots of data. And so I think that there's more understanding in a lot of departments that these are the sort of things that we need to prepare our students for. It's not replacing us, because there's not many of us that need to be replaced. Okay, so let's go on. Sometimes faculty are hard to talk to, because faculty tend to be exceedingly focused, some of them because of the tenure track, but most of them because they love it so much, on very specific things. So a couple of, I just looked up some random titles for, I think these are dissertations here at OU. Measurement of TT bar production cross-section, top quark mass extraction using dilepton events in PP bar collisions. This is research that someone spent many, many years on, and they really thought this is good stuff. Someone who does essentially textual analysis. So they do, a lot of computational textual analysis To swear like a sailor, language, culture, and meaning in the American maritime world, 1750 to 1850. Not outside 1750 to 1850, but 1750 to 1850. Elimination of threading dislocations in as-grown lead selenide films and patterned silicon 111 substrate using molecular beam epitaxy. Okay, so those of you who are supporting researchers, this is what they are focused on. They're spending a lot of time thinking, writing, putting together grants, mentoring students on these topics. So when you talk to them, it might take a while to get them out of this mode and think about some of the things that you need to talk to them about in terms of your support for them. So the idea of communication, the idea of understanding what they're doing and why they're doing it. Certainly you don't have to know this stuff, but understand that this is where they live day in and day out. And so when you talk to them, expect some disconnect. Those of you who deal with researchers, is that a fair statement? What do you think? Oh, yeah. And the thing is, as a lot of you are in the research support roles, you've got people that may be doing all three of these. Yep. There's an awful lot of things going on. So you might have to deal with a lot of these different things. So listening to them and understanding, where they come from, that takes work. That takes a lot of work and a lot of thinking about that. Swearing like a sailor, maybe. Yeah. No, faculty would never swear at you, right? I can't imagine. I would not imagine that faculty were anything but sweetness and light in terms of, anyway. Yep. Yeah, I mean, you ask about minimum requirements. Again, cases are different. So, I wouldn't say there's in many places a minimum level that say, yep, you got it if you meet this level. It's really contextual. And so this time when you're writing up your life story, when you're writing up, what you did, you got to spend a lot of time explaining where it fits, how it fits into the rest of the research ecosystem around the world. And so, there you go. If you can't really say minimum. It really just depends. It's really contextual. Yep. Okay, so there we go. I talked a little bit about the need. Here's the need on the right. This is just from physics. So this is just physics. In 2019, there were about 1,900 PhDs conferred. In the same year, the number of positions for tenure track positions was 369. The number of temporary full-time positions was 173. And then non-tenure track permanent positions, this is the sort of clinical professor, clinical assistant professor, those sorts. So you notice that those numbers do not add up to 1900, and this is within physics. The bottom says the number of faculty that leave. And the number of faculty leaving is about equal to those numbers of positions. So it's not a growth industry. And interestingly enough, the number of faculty that leave without tenure is really not that high. It's between 10 and 20%. So overall about 16%. So in general, people get tenure usually because it's very careful, when they get hired, this is an investment that the university is making. It's also they can be very selective. So for open positions, there can be hundreds of people applying for the position that want to get into a tenure or tenure track position. So those are the needs. Again, if you don't have tenure, you don't leave. You can also think about what would happen if you don't go into academia. So this is from the NSF of doctorates, and this shows what people earn, after they. This is once they get their doctorate. Notice that the green bars are much bigger than the blue bars, which means it would be an academic position, or the orange bars, which is a postdoc position. Why in the world would you go for tenure? Why would you do this? You make less money. You got this 7-year, stress-inducing time period. Security, if you get it, is part of it. What else do you think it is? Yeah, your own boss. What else? It's less stressful. Oh, there you go. Fun. I like that answer. Fun. A lot of people do this because they just love this so much. You really love doing research. You really love the academic environment. You really like the people you work with. It's also status, and it's definitely, like I said, you won the lottery. The kind of a guaranteed for life sort of. You get to do your own stuff. But, so think about the people, the faculty that have tenure that are doing this. They're doing this because, they want to do it. They really want to do it. And so again, very focused. They're, very straightforward. They want to do it. And so this is your audience too. Tenure allows some grants, but there's a lot of people, and there's non-tenure track positions, research professorships that are not tenured, but people are writing grants all the time. And so, you don't necessarily have to be tenured to write grants and to get grants. You got to be in a position where people will say, yeah, this is someone who's going to be around. But there's a lot of people that their entire life are in research positions that may not be tenured. Yeah, some schools have a percentage of tenured positions, but that's usually dealt with. That's more often dealt with at the hiring job and not at the tenure job. I say that. There are some institutions that will hire 2 people when they only have 1 tenured position down the road. But most universities, interesting enough, aren't that way. Yeah, some people, they've been in schools their entire life, so why would I want to leave? Good, good. Yeah, Henry's faculty and not faculty, and boy, does he write grants. Henry, how many grants do you have in the hopper right now? There you go. There you go. Okay, so let's go on. Yeah, well, there's only so many that you can be PI on. I mean, let's face it, they're, just in terms of time. So after tenure, you're usually an assistant professor, usually the promotion from, I mean, associate professor, usually the promotion from assistant to associate comes at the same time as the tenure position. And then if you keep being active and build an international reputation, proven, you bring in more money, same sort of things, there will be another process where you write up your life story, you get external reviews, you get voted on by the department, by the college, by the university, and you can become a full professor. That gives you a bigger name. It gives you more money, usually. Oh, assistant professors certainly submit lots of grants. Absolutely. So this is the next step in promotion. And it's like the last one, except for there's no, you do it or you're out sort of thing. And there's no time frame. So some people go up for full professor very quickly. Other people will take their time. And some people stay associate professors for various reasons. So that's the next step. So when we talked about these academic thing, assistant is the entry level job. Associate is sort of the mid-level. You've got this job, but you need to prove yourself to go up to the next step, which is the full professor. And then there's the endowed professorship. Okay, adjunct. Let me get back to the, okay, I'll do adjunct now. The adjunct is the slave labor of academia. An adjunct is, no, well, I think it's even less than a reader. An adjunct is someone that is just hired semester by semester to teach specific courses. They're paid almost nothing per course. Quite often they have to teach at 2 or 3 different institutions. So this is really the slave labor, and it's a really sad statement, the number of adjuncts that are teaching our classes. That's, personal statement. Yeah, I mean, it's someone that, is just hired off the street, so to speak, because we have classes that we need to fulfill. It's different from a non-tenure track lecturer or assistant professor, associate professor, that's often called renewable term. Renewable term is someone that has a longer term contract. So it may be 3 years or 5 years. Quite often they're just there to teach. Sometimes some places have renewable term research professors, depending on how they're funded, but they are more part of the community. An adjunct is, really has almost no status at all, has less status than the graduate TAs and RAs, because the graduate TAs and RAs are hired to be in the research groups. adjuncts just contract PT. So really a sad statement. Okay, other questions? I'm going to get to endowed professorship in just a second, but other questions about this? So again, these were the things on the right side of, who's who on my initial slide, which is the people that don't have this tenure, you get to do what you want for life. Yeah, it really is. It really is. What's sadder is the increase in the use of adjuncts at some universities. Some universities are trying to avoid it, but some universities, this is how they run. Okay, let's get to the endowed professorships. These are the really bigwigs in terms of professors. Now, what happens for an endowed professorship is someone goes out and raises a bunch of money. Talk to donors. This is usually the president that does this. Talk to donors, wine them, dine them, and raise a whole bunch of money. Now, these funds may or may not have strings attached. Depends on who it is. Usually there's some sort of strings attached. Some less than others. But you get a bunch of money and then you go out and you try to steal someone. Well, maybe you hire someone from inside, but quite often you steal someone from another university. And you steal them by saying, well, I'm going to pay you more. But then, even more so, it gives them even more independence. So they have this pot of money that now they can play with that is their own. And so if you see someone that has a named professorship or an endowed professorship, that's someone that they hired. They bought a bunch of money in to get this person to your university. They also have an expectation to bring in a bunch of money. So usually it's someone that has a real track record of bringing in a bunch of money and is going to be expected to continue to bring in money. So these are people that really have their own research group that is is funded somewhat through the university as well as external grants. So these are the really big names. So if you have someone that has a named professorship, endowed professorship, those are the really big name researchers. Now, just because you have tenure doesn't mean that you don't have to do anything. And the expectations are somewhat similar. So these are the expectations of going from associate professor to full professor, or even more so going from a professorship to an endowed professorship. More of the same, except for on steroids. So you expect to do more of this, success in bringing in money, writing books, papers, having more of an international reputation. This is also people that tend to do more service to the discipline. So maybe they become presidents of associations or run conferences, those sorts of things. So these tend to be the real leaders and therefore move up to these higher level professorships. So this is how you get better. But it's not true that you can't be fired. So going back to the people who said, yeah, this isn't really true, you can lose tenure. A lot of them is for doing things that are wrong. A lot of them are doing things for long. And there's some sad stories here about personal behavior, university policies, so forth. But there's also this little thing in here, which is people can get rid of tenured professors by just eliminating an academic unit. And this is known to happen. Say there's a financial emergency or we're going somewhere else. And so we're going to close an academic unit. We're going to get rid of all our tenured professors and maybe hire some of them back if we want to teach. Interestingly enough, there was some increase in this happening over the last year because of COVID. So tenured positions can disappear. And depending on your school, this may be more or less likely. But then almost every institution these days now have something called post-tenure review. So there's a lot of pushback about this idea of you've got tenure, therefore there's no accountability. And so there is. A lot of this comes from, at least for state schools, from, state legislatures who say, these universities professors don't do anything. Why should we keep funding them? Well, they're funding them less and less, funding us less and less anyway, but, there needs to be some accountability. And so quite often the university does this to set up the system themselves. So it's not thrust upon us by legislators, but we do it ourselves. Usually post-tenure review is something that is either required by trustees or board of regents. Sometimes legislatures require this, or the administration says we're going to do this either because they're not happy with the faculty or they see it coming from external sources and therefore want to set this up themselves so that it's a little bit more academic. So here's what we have at OU. Yep. That has happened sometimes. That is happening perhaps more and more. Okay, yeah, OU's post-tenure review. You do annual evaluations. Again, Henry talked about this a little bit. We write yearly annual evaluations, sort of justifies what we're doing. The department and the dean signs off on these. And then every 5 years, I've got to collect these, do a self-evaluation. You do a, essentially the same sort of write-up, but not nearly as extensive as, a tenure packet. And then the department looks at this, you don't vote on it, but either the chair or the committee running the department looks at these and then signs off on them. If they're happy with it, then it goes to the dean. If the dean's happy on it, you're okay for the next 5 years. If not, then they talk to you about, okay, how are you going to do better? How are you going to do more? And then, you go back and maybe you have another 5 years to get better, but you can fail post-tenure review. So this is another way. It doesn't happen very often, but this is another way that people with tenure can lose tenure. And again, for a professional development plan, maybe it brings in some of the aspects of external evaluations and some of that. So tenure really isn't necessarily forever. You do have to justify yourself regularly. So there we go. That's the idea of tenure, what faculty think about and how they get here. Sort of the expectations that they have. Notice I didn't talk much about teaching. Again, this is very much university dependent, but at unfortunate again, personally, personal statement here, that an unfortunate number of universities teaching really takes a back seat, which is sad, but it's also changing. You know, um, when I was a student, you know, classes looked like that. Notice what direction everybody's looking. You know, it's down front, and you know, whatever he's writing on his overhead here, that's what we're looking at. Fortunately, there's more and more schools that are looking at better ways of serving our students. And so some of the comments people made about, you know, clinical professors or professors that really focused on teaching, really they're looking at doing better with teaching. And so there's people now that spend a lot more time thinking about how you go from everybody looking at the professor, which is not necessarily very productive, to people working together, which is a lot more productive. There's people that do more research in this area, particularly, you know, physics has got, you know, more and more of this going on. And so it's becoming more important. Unfortunately, where this fits in with tenure is not as strong as perhaps it could be. Okay, so I want to finish up real quick and then have more time for discussion. Wanted to talk a little bit about the direction for tenure. This is the difference in tenured versus non-tenured, 1969 versus 2009. And notice that it has more than flipped. In 69, 78% of the faculty were tenured or tenure track. Now it's more like 33%. Again, this is physics, and this is from 2000 and 2018. There hasn't been a big increase, but this is percent of full-time faculty that are not tenured. And so it's gone from, you know, sort of 12, 14% to over 20%. So more and more people do not have this stability that tenure gives. This is from the American Association of University Professors. This is the fraction of full-time instructional faculty that are tenured, tenure track, part-time, or graduates. And notice that research institutions, you get, you know, and as you go down to two-year colleges, the number of part-time, which is the adjuncts, is a huge percentage of the people who teach. Okay, so I'm almost out of time, so I have two questions that I want you to think about and then answer in the chat. And we'll, you know, have our discussion there, or you can, you know, put on your microphone and talk. Here's the list of people that I had. I have two different questions here. One is, in your role, who's most important to watch and pay attention to? And the second question is, who needs the most help? And notice that these are two different questions. So I'll leave you with those two questions and we can talk about that, chat about that now till the end of our session. So what do you think? Think about that a second. So who do you watch and who needs help? Good, yeah. I mean, there's people who bring you in money and there's people who you work with, and you might think about those differences. Right? Good, good. Grad students need the most help. I like that answer. I like that answer. Okay. Yeah, assistant professors, they're really stressed. So yeah, definitely think about those. Good. And I hope most of you will not need to deal with presidents or trustees. There is my wish for you, my ending wish for you, at least for the time being. So that's what I had. Any other questions or comments, thoughts? What do you think? Good. I'm glad. Well, yeah, but if you're faculty, tenured faculty, you've won the lottery. Who would I watch? Yeah, I mean, the full professors and the endowed professors, you got to be careful because they can make a lot of noise. And if you have someone like Henry's role, sometimes he has to be careful about, vice presidents. Is that a fair statement, Henry?
Oh, goodness, yes.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, a lot of things that we do sometimes is pushing rope. That's an excellent question. Someone just asked, if assistant professors are so busy and stressed, do they necessarily have any interest in meeting with IT staff? I would like someone from IT staff to answer that. And again, if assistant professors are so stressed, do they have an interest in meeting with IT staff, and why?
I think that's going to depend on what you can do for them for that
Mhm.
4.5 year period where they're running flat out
Mhm.
trying to make their name.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I was going to share that same observation. This is Mark from the University of Illinois. We've tried to embed ourselves with HR and departments that are hiring faculty, and before they arrive on campus, we try and introduce ourselves to them. So those startup funds that you were mentioning, they can use those better if they're aware of these services. And by demonstrating that IT has a value to them before they spend their money, we can get more engagements at the project design phase rather than when their stuff has already shown up on a loading dock and we have to assemble it and get it ready.
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely true. Yeah. One thing that Henry has been doing here at OU is finding ways so that we can all share resources and make it lots cheaper for all of us. So, all those things are really important. I know at OU, they have a new faculty workshop, and IT and Henry tries to talk to them every year when they do the workshop.
And it's a lot of fun.
It is. It is. Okay, is there anything else? We're at the end. I don't want to step on your break,
Good.
but I'm around.
So I'm currently an assistant professor. I'm in a department with a lot of assistant professors. We are regularly in contact with IT, and I live and breathe the thought of IT. Good IT can make or break an assistant professor. I would just comment to those of you that are worried about like the demands of specific faculty. One of the problems that I've found is that assistant professors will get promises when they are brought in that then the promises that were given were not by people who could necessarily fulfill those. So just, I realize that assistant professors can be kind of drama queens in that regard too. but just keep in mind that sometimes their expectations, they don't understand that the promises made to them was not something that they think that you are the person supposed to be fulfilling it. And even if you tell them, hey, I'm not really the right person, that person is still expected to produce the same amount of output as they were had those promises actually been fulfilled. I don't know how to say that specifically, but I've encountered a lot of issues of folks saying, hey, I was told I was going to get this, at the same time as going, well, this is a general resource.
Yep, absolutely. And there's plenty of cases of different examples of that, unfortunately. And part of that is different money comes from different pots, and that can be a big problem too. The other issue that you got to be careful about is that now let's just straight out say it, faculty egos, and sometimes they think they know more than they actually do. Fair statement, all? And so when you talk to them, you need to make sure that you're showing your expertise and making sure that they understand how you can help them. Oh yeah, good point, Henry. There is constant churn among administrators and upper level people, and what one provost might want to do, the next one very well might not. So that's part of it too. So if you can help people manage that, and a change within the new administration, sometimes that's something to work with too. Okay, good. Thank you all. I guess we can take a break, Henry. What do you want to do next?
So we are on break until 1:15, and Douglas Genowine will be here to talk about the cyber infrastructure milieu. We're looking forward to it. Thank you, Bruce. Let's give Bruce a round of virtual applause. This has been fantastic. I always love when Bruce does this, and I learn new things every single time. Thank you very much to our audience. You've been wonderfully interactive with Bruce. I'm very, very happy about that. And I think we all got a tremendous amount out of this. Thank you all, and we'll see you in 27 minutes.
Excellent.
Sorry, 22 minutes.
Thank you too. And thank you for all your comments and additions. Excellent.
Thank you all.